Chapter 707. The Shadow Plane. A huge silver-white ring was placed on the ground, surrounded by countless strange runes. A staircase was paved with white marble, and in the middle was a laboratory that Gloria had set up in the Shadow Plane. At this time, Gloria and the Fallen Witch were standing on both sides of the ring. The two legendary witches floated in the air, and their bodies were surrounded by powerful magic. Soren's position was at the periphery, and his whole body was shrouded in a divine light. At first glance, mortals couldn't help but want to worship him. His divine power was being consumed slightly. It had been a week since Soren returned. Because he had consumed a lot of divine power while helping the goddess of magic, he had been quietly accumulating power during this time, wanting to master the divine spark ability, space change, as soon as possible. However, what he had to do today was more important. Even if Soren didn't have enough divine power, he had to be present to help the two legendary witches. It's about to begin. Gloria's voice was directly transmitted to Soren's mind. She said seriously, if anything goes wrong later, immediately open a divine barrier and cut off the energy connection of the floating ring. Mother and I don't have enough energy to pay attention to other things while maintaining the floating ring. I'll leave everything to you. Soren's expression was quite serious. He nodded slightly and said, "It's fine. Just do it. I'll be here. Nothing will go wrong." Hearing Soren's words, Gloria's expression couldn't help but relax a little. She slowly said, "Okay. Let's begin." As the arcane runes on the silver-white floating ring lit up one by one, two powerful magic began to madly converge, and then formed a substantial energy vortex. Then, it began to be injected into the ground under their feet, and through a strange runic circuit, it was transmitted to the large floating ring in the center. Buzz! An inexplicable resonance began, and the surrounding ground suddenly trembled violently. Crack! A series of cracking sounds could be heard. Under the effect of the enormous magic power, the ground under Soren's feet seemed to have experienced a violent earthquake. Following that, the ground around them started to crack. With Gloria and the Fallen Witch as the center, the ground within 100 meters of them formed oval-shaped cracks. The solid rocks gradually cracked, and the ground seemed to have been forcibly uprooted by some kind of powerful force. Gravity began to distort. Every plane had different gravitational influences, but the laws of gravity in the multiverse were not determined by matter like in his previous life. Instead, they were determined by the degree of connection between the plane and the earth elemental plane. For most legendary adepts, or the kingdoms of gods, gravity was something that they could control when they created it. Change the structure of the plane, change the space of the plane, and change the connection between the planes. The creation of a half-plane determined the things that the creator needed to control, including gravity, air, plane barrier, atmosphere, and so on. The scattered stones in the surroundings strangely floated up. At this time, the gravity in the vicinity of the floating ring had been completely distorted. Some things were strangely suspended in mid-air, and the huge force had caused the nearby space to have a resonance effect. If there was even the slightest abnormality, something very dangerous could happen. Energy transfer complete. The figure of the Thalling experiment ET-1 floated out of the central laboratory. Because the gravity was temporarily distorted, as an experimental Thalling, its strength was not enough. It now looked like it was floating in the astral plane. But at this moment, it still did its job dutifully. It said in a cold mechanical voice, "The floating ring is operating normally. The current operating speed is 60%. The experimental effect is expected to be achieved after the operating speed reaches 80%. Rumble. The surrounding ground completely cracked. With Gloria and the Fallen Witch transmitting their magic power at the same time, the ground within a diameter of 150 meters with the laboratory as the center was completely split from the surface. Then, it slowly rose into the air under the distorted gravity. The process was quite slow, but with the operation of the floating ring, the separated ground floated to a height of about 10 meters. It looked like a floating island. It's a success. Soren's expression couldn't help but become excited. The light of divinity shrouded the surroundings. Although his magic power was not as good as the two legendary witches, his divine power could replace most of the power of the mortal world when needed. Energy transfer is stable. Start recording the progress of the experiment. Calculating the power of the floating ring. A red light appeared. Fouling experiment number 1's gemstone eyes shot out a ray of light. It looked like a scanning ray from the future era. This was a very advanced detection spell, knowledge from the alchemy books of the Wizard Tower. Gloria's face was slightly pale. Fallen Witch's condition was not very good at the moment. The energy required to test a large floating ring was difficult for even a legendary witch to bear. But before they mastered the energy device technology of the Arcane Empire, they could only use this method to test the recently completed research of the floating ring. At this time, the alchemy laboratory and the surrounding land had been completely lifted. The weight could not be calculated for the time being, but judging by the naked eye, it was definitely more than 100,000 tons. Because it was only a preliminary test, they did not go too deep into the ground when they split the surface. If they wanted to lift the deeper layers of rock, then the power of the floating ring would be a lot higher. Time passed by, minute by minute. The power of the floating ring became more and more powerful. When the energy transfer reached a critical point, Gloria and Fallen Witch stopped the energy transfer at the same time. Then, the arcane runes near the laboratory faded one by one, and finally, in a strange way, they were suspended about 10 meters in the air. Soren's power was crazily outputting. The light of divinity shrouded this space. Gloria and Fallen Witch, who had stopped the energy transfer, did not stay idle. Instead, they quickly descended around the floating ring. The hand of magic controlled alchemy devices in the air and buried them into the ground at an amazing speed. These alchemy devices looked very similar to the energy transmission devices of the demiplane golem factory. They arranged the magic circuit in a way that ordinary people could not understand, and finally connected the 6 energy nodes on the large floating ring. The magic circuit is complete. Start the last step of the test. Synchronizing data calculation. The cold mechanical voice echoed. Gloria was a little relieved, and then a little nervous looked at Fallen Witch, and then nodded to Soren outside. Holy form. Soren's figure seemed to be magnified in an instant. He looked like a human figure emitting holy light. In the process of accelerating the consumption of his divine power, when the energy operation broke through the limit, he suddenly withdrew all his power. Buzz. The land suspended in midair suddenly shook, and then fell sharply. However, at this time, the magic circuit was also instantly lit up. After falling about 5 meters, the small floating island gradually rose and finally stabilized at a position about 20 meters above the ground. It worked. Gloria's face was full of excitement, and Fallen Witch also hugged her excitedly. Finally, it worked. After spending a lot of energy and effort, they finally completed the research of the large floating ring. The energy consumed by the floating city would be greatly reduced when maintaining the floating state because many runes had been solidified on it. If the energy needed was too large, even the alchemy technology of the Arcane Empire could not maintain it. There were many aspects of the floating city's energy consumption, and the Arcanists were not so paranoid as to spend most of their energy on maintaining the floating state of a city. It looks like it's a success. Soren was also a little relieved at this time, but then frowned and murmured, but it's still a little small. Is the power of a large floating ring only able to maintain this level of operation? A land with a diameter of 150 meters. If it was used as a standard for a house, then this area was really not small. But if it was used as a standard for a city, this area was really nothing. The floating city of the Arcane Empire was a real city, not like the one in the Silver Age, which was only the size of a dozen castles. Any recorded floating city had an area of more than 10 kilometers, which was equivalent to raising all the land from the city of Moder to the port area into the air. A large floating ring had exhausted the strange silver-white metal obtained from the Wizard Tower. If they really wanted to raise a city into the air, then at least hundreds of such large floating rings would be needed. This was simply not a task that could be done by individual strength. Floating successful. The elemental pool is working properly. Record the results of the experiment. With the stable operation of the floating ring, the floating stones distorted by gravity also fell to the ground. There was no abnormality with the energy transmission device. The elemental pool arranged by Gloria was enough to maintain the floating land. As for making it fly and move, I'm afraid it's another academic problem. I'm going to use this place as the basis for half-bit wall research. Gloria's figure came to Soren's side. At the moment, she smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. She whispered, "The floating ring needs energy to maintain. With the energy of the elemental pool, I want to try to open up a half-bit wall space directly." Half-bit wall. This was a field that only wizards who had entered the legendary realm could dabble in. No half-bit wall was born out of thin air. As the core of the half-bit wall, the elemental pool was connected to the wind, water, fire, and earth elemental planes. The birth of a half-bit wall was like playing a game of creating a world. The proportion of any element needed to be studied and calculated. After building the material foundation, the creator also needed to connect the energy sources of the upper and lower planes. It was not very difficult to create a half-bit wall. But it was quite difficult to create a half-bit wall that could allow living people to survive. The half-bit wall of the Northern Witch Council could only be regarded as a dead place. Even the air in that half-bit wall was very thin. A top large half-bit wall was already like a divine kingdom, allowing other races to live in it. Chapter 708. The energy is not enough. The figure of the fallen witch appeared beside the two of them. Although the test of the large floating ring seemed to be successful, Karina's expression was not very satisfied. She had always had a strong obsession with the alchemy knowledge of the arcane empire and the floating city. Today's test of the large floating ring was completed entirely by laborious energy consumption, which was not satisfactory for her, who had conducted research on elemental fission. Without the core knowledge of the arcane empire, the energy of the elemental pool could only maintain the floating research. Fallen Witch glanced at Soren, hesitated for a moment, and slowly said, "The energy of the elemental pool is not enough. Maintaining the levitation of this land is already the limit of the elemental pool. If we want to conduct more in-depth research on the floating city, we must find a way to provide more energy." Fallen Witch hesitated for a moment. She could not help but look at Gloria next to her with a little guilty conscience. She seemed to care about her daughter's attitude, but the pursuit in her heart made her speak out. She said with a little frustration in her heart, "Soren, I want to conduct another research experiment on elemental fission. Nature's bane. The destroyer of nature." This was the result of Fallen Witch's research. For this reason, she was wanted by the Droll Order, forcing the senior members of the Northern Witch Council to banish her to Whiterun. To be honest, Fallen Witch did not feel very good in her heart. However, as a top wizard, she had a lot in common with the scientists in her previous life. She had always hoped that she could have another chance to conduct research, but reality did not give her any chance at all. Soren was silent. Gloria could not help but be silent. The silence of the two made Fallen Witch's expression suddenly become very lost. It seemed that she did not know what to say for a while. Elemental fission research. This thing was similar to atomic bomb research, but it was probably more dangerous than this. At the beginning, the research work of the Fallen Witches was supported by the Northern Witch Council. In order to carry out this research, the Northern Witch Council provided a lot of materials and manpower. The cost of this thing would not be much less than the Manhattan Project. With the current financial resources of Mordor City, it would inevitably be a very heavy burden. Most importantly, the elemental fission in this world was caused by direct energy. If an accident were to occur, it would be too uncontrollable. It could be equivalent to an atomic bomb explosion. Back then, the disaster caused by the Fallen Witch was a terrifying explosion. It seemed like there was no chance. Soren and Gloria's silence made the Fallen Witch smile bitterly. She turned around and was about to leave when Soren suddenly spoke. "Wait a minute." Soren's expression was solemn, and he seemed to be hesitating. After a while, he said slowly, "Let me think about it. How about I give you an answer later?" Was there a chance? The fallen witch's face suddenly showed a hint of surprise, and Gloria could not help but look at Soren in shock. It seemed that she wanted to say something. To be honest, even if the fallen witch was her mother, she did not agree with the other party to carry out such a dangerous research. Soren seemed to have an answer in his heart. He looked at the fallen witch in front of him and said in a deep voice, "I have something to deal with in 2 days. If there are no accidents, I should be able to give you an answer when I come back." The Battle of Golems. According to the timeline, the Battle of Golems should be about to break out. This was mentioned a long time ago, including the legendary Blade Master who appeared in this battle. The reason why Soren agreed to the fallen witch's research was also related to this battle. As everyone knew, the material plane still retained a small number of relics left from the Arcane Empire, and the outbreak of the Battle of Golems was related to these ancient relics. In the Battle of Golems, a large number of golems left from the Arcane Empire appeared. These golems that had been silent for a long time were all activated, which must require a very large energy supply device. The intensity of the Battle of Golems was no less than a war between kingdoms. To be able to supply the energy consumption of so many golems, Soren was very suspicious that there was a relatively complete energy supply system left from the Arcane Empire in the depths of the ruins where the Battle of Golems broke out. There were only a few dozen golems in the city of Mordor, but thousands of golems were activated in the Battle of Golems. There was a huge difference in energy between the two. The energy consumption of maintaining the golems would not be lower than that of the infantry armor in the Star Age. The elemental pool of Mordor could only supply a few dozen golems. It could be understood as a power station, but the Battle of Golems was equivalent to an armored infantry legion. If they could gain something in the Battle of Golems, Soren would agree to the research work of the fallen witch. A day passed in the blink of an eye. Gloria had undoubtedly become a person of action. The day after the elemental pool was relatively stable, she began to prepare for the construction of the half-bit wall. Creating a half-bit wall required a high level of basic knowledge. For example, knowledge, plane, knowledge, space, knowledge, elements, and so on. Under normal circumstances, at least 500 points of knowledge were needed to meet the requirements of creating a half-bit wall. Soren's knowledge was not enough. As a god, his knowledge was not as good as that of a legendary witch. It was a bit shameful to say it out loud. But Soren was now studying and mastering the ability of the divine personality, space change, so when Gloria was preparing to create the half-bit wall, he could still play a great role. The core part of the half-bit wall was naturally the elemental pool. Gloria had already completed this part, so what she needed to do next was to open up a small dimensional space crack. It was a deep darkness. There was almost no light in the surroundings, and only some silver-white halos could be vaguely seen at the farthest distance. Gloria's figure stood in the void. This was the dimensional space crack that she opened up. It was an unstable space that could disappear at any time. What she needed to do next was to connect it to the elemental pool that she had built, and then rely on the energy of the 4 elemental planes to stabilize this dimensional space. A divine radiance emerged. Soren's figure also appeared in this small dimensional space. He looked around a little, then nodded to Gloria and said, "Let's begin." Earth elemental plane. Fire elemental plane. Wind elemental plane. Water elemental plane. In the deep, dark void beneath their feet, the energy radiance representing the 4 elemental planes gradually emerged. Traces of elemental power were extracted from the 4 elemental planes and injected into this narrow space. In an instant, Soren felt a heavy force. This was the gravity formed by the connection to the earth elemental plane. It was not the gravity of the half-bit wall, but the gravity transmitted from the earth elemental plane. Then there was a trace of scorching temperature. The temperature inside the newly formed dimensional space was quite low, basically not much different from the astral plane. For ordinary people, entering it was like entering space. That was to say, with their strength, there was no impact at all. Ordinary people would have died a long time ago. Then, there was a faint breeze. Thin air began to appear in this narrow space. At this time, Soren could already disperse the divine shield on his body. Those professions below the legendary level could also temporarily move around in this space. Finally, there was a trace of warm water vapor. As the half-bit wall and the four elemental planes completed the connection, a very thin film-like barrier began to appear at the edge of the space under the influence of the power of the laws of the multiverse. Plane barrier. A planar barrier that couldn't be more fragile took shape. 15 meters in diameter. Soren scanned with his perception and determined the size of the half-bit wall. With the strength of the legendary witch Gloria, she could only create such a large space at the beginning. Now it could not be called a half-bit wall, it could only be said to be a very small extra-dimensional space. Of course. If a god wanted to create a divine kingdom, then it must be much, much bigger than this. This space needed to be expanded little by little. The half-bit wall controlled by the Northern Witch Council had been nurtured for hundreds of thousands of years. Under normal circumstances, Gloria wouldn't be able to create a decent demi-plane without decades of time. But who told her man to be a god? Saint form. Soren's figure turned into a tall figure emitting golden light in an instant. With the power of divinity enveloping this narrow space, the speed at which the elemental pool extracted energy began to increase rapidly, and this dimensional space, which was only 15 meters in diameter, was also constantly expanding. What gods mastered was the power of the laws. Creating a divine kingdom was the basic ability of every god. This was the gap in the level of the laws, which could not be matched by pure power. His divine power was constantly being consumed. But the space of the half-bit wall was constantly getting bigger. 30 meters. 50 meters. 100 meters. 150 meters. 200 meters. 300 meters. When Soren stopped consuming his divine power, this dimensional space had been expanded 20 times, reaching a diameter of about 300 meters. However, Soren still did not seem to be satisfied with this. I can only open up such a large space. Soren rested for a moment and then said, I must leave a part of my divine power to construct this bit wall. So, let's start with creating land. His divine power was still not enough. Soren had regarded this as an exercise to create a divine kingdom at the moment. Creating a half-bit wall was like a child playing with mud. It did not matter whether it was suitable for human survival or not. But if it was a divine kingdom, then it must not be so casual. Connect to the elemental plane of Earth. With the continuous infusion of Soren's divine power, the elemental pool under the void suddenly began to run wildly. The connection channel representing the elemental plane of Earth suddenly covered the other elemental planes. With a huge amount of elemental energy being introduced into the half-bit wall, a tiny dust suddenly appeared in the void under the two people's feet. Chapter 709. A very inconspicuous speck of dust. But it was the beginning of the entire half-bit wall. As Soren extracted more and more energy from the elemental plane of Earth, a rock structure gradually appeared under the two people's feet. The process of forming the Earth was not slow. Although it was only inside a very narrow space, there was a spectacular and shocking feeling of creating a world. The kingdoms created by the gods were all energy extracted from the elemental plane because no god, not even the existence of a great divine power, could gather such a huge amount of power completely by themselves. This was an application of the energy of the multiverse. As gods who mastered the power of the laws, they could easily control all this. But if it was done by a legendary wizard, the time and energy needed to be spent would be many times more. Matter and energy. It was difficult to explain clearly in a few words, but in short, all planes relied on the foundation of the four elemental planes. The half-bit wall would grow. The half-bit walls in the multiverse today were all extracting the power of the four elemental planes little by little over a long period of time, and then expanding to the current scale. The power of the four elemental planes was almost endless. The mysteries contained the deepest secrets of the multiverse. Even the high and mighty gods could not figure out the rules behind it. Rock. Soren did not let the land cover the entire half-bit wall, he only covered a part of it. The half-bit wall needed to form a balance. Connect to the fire elemental plane. The power of fire in the elemental pool began to expand rapidly, and soon replaced the connecting channel of the elemental plane of Earth. Under the thick rock layer, the power of the fire element became stronger and stronger. When it reached a certain critical point, magma began to appear under the surface. The temperature of the half-bit wall began to rise rapidly, from extremely cold below zero to about 10 degrees. The energy of the fire elemental plane could not be completely formed for the time being. After all, the half-bit wall was not a complete plane space. Only by relying on the automatic operation of the elemental pool could the magma be formed stably inside the half-bit wall. If the channel of the fire element was cut off, the magma would cool down quickly. There were many things to consider when creating a half-bit wall. The energy of the elemental plane of Earth was too heavy, and the gravity of the half-bit wall would be greatly increased. There were many spaces in the multiverse that had a serious gravitational influence. In some levels of the abyss, the gravity was even more than 10 times that of a material plane. This was because the plane of the abyss had been deflected when it was formed. This meant that the energy of the Earth elemental plane had completely suppressed the other planes. The gravity is almost there. The temperature is about right. Soren sensed the changes in the demi-plane, then nodded at Gloria and began to connect to the wind elemental plane. Air. The power of the wind. The thin air inside the half-plane gradually filled up along with the elemental channel. The power of the wind elemental plane was very important to the entire half-plane. Whether other creatures could survive in the half-plane depended on the creator's understanding of the wind elemental domain. This was really a top student-level mission. There had been many legendary adepts who had been able to create pseudoplanes since ancient times, but there were very few adepts who had been able to turn their pseudoplanes into living spaces for other species. This was because the creator's understanding of the world was taken into consideration. This was the same even for gods. Some gods' kingdoms were very beautiful, but some gods' kingdoms were very barren. The knowledge of gods was also limited. Although some gods tried to imitate the runes of material planes to create divine kingdoms, because of the difference in their own power, the divine kingdoms created in the end were very different. The transformation of divine kingdoms was an extremely large project. In addition to collecting faith, most gods were thinking about how to build their own divine kingdoms. In other words, it was the ideal kingdom that the gods hoped for. Connect to the water elemental plane. A trace of water vapor appeared in this narrow half-plane. Under the guidance of Soren's divine power, the uneven ground gradually converged into a pool. Earth, water, fire, air. The connection between the half-plane and the 4 elemental planes had been formed. With the constant operation of the elemental pool, the energy from the 4 elemental planes would gradually flow into this half-plane. This process was quite slow. The Earth would grow at a speed invisible to the naked eye. Perhaps after a year, the land area here would expand by 1 or 2 meters, and then the other 3 elements would also increase. The expansion of the half-plane required the efforts of the Creator himself. By strengthening the size of the elemental pool, guiding his own power, or even directly transferring things from other planes, and so on, this small space would constantly grow and change. When the power of the 4 elements reached a critical point, the Creator would have to plan this space. One was artificial transformation, such as where the water flow should start, the size of the lakes and oceans, how the nutrients of the land should be suitable for the growth of plants, whether the changes in the monsoon and weather were necessary, and what the difference in temperature between the north and south of the half-plane should be, and so on. Most creators let it change on its own, only occasionally guiding it when needed. Therefore, some spaces had very high gravity, some spaces had very low temperature, some spaces were full of wind and sand, and some spaces simply turned into a sea of fire. Soren had been to a half-plane that was completely a sea of fire, and magma could be seen flowing everywhere on the ground. Now it depends on what you're going to do here. Soren took back his divine power. He just helped Gloria to open up the connection between the 4 elemental planes and lay the foundation for this half-plane space. How to build it depended on Gloria's own ideas. It should have more life aura. Gloria's figure floated in the air. As the half-plane space she opened up, she had her own power of law, a kind of ability to control the entire space. This half-plane was her home ground. The elemental pool slowly rotated, like a whirlpool constantly drawing energy from the 4 elemental planes. The part that represented earth and water was obviously higher than the part that represented wind and fire. Gloria seemed to have her own understanding of the structure of the world. If this continues, there will be more and more water in this half-plane, and the land will gradually increase. Soren didn't say anything at this moment. The power of a single element was one-sided, just like how earth and fire could form magma, and the collision of cold and heat could form a monsoon. The power of any space didn't exist alone. The 4 elemental planes also had other elements, but they had their own home ground. In the corresponding elemental plane, the energy of the home ground element completely crushed the other elements. Mortals couldn't move at all when they entered the earth elemental plane because of the supergravity. They could be quickly burned to ashes when they entered the fire elemental plane. It was almost impossible to find land when they entered the wind elemental plane, and they could only rely on swimming when they entered the water elemental plane. The material plane was a flat surface. Soren had discovered this a long time ago. The material plane was a huge flat surface. It wasn't a planet. If one looked at the material plane from the perspective of a god, everything was completely different from his previous life, including the huge passage at the bottom of the material plane that connected the 4 elemental planes. Since Soren became a god, he had been guessing who created the material plane. This was an incredible world. Chapter 7:10. The creation of a half-plane was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. After stabilizing the connection between the 4 elemental planes, Soren and Gloria returned to Motor City. At present, this half-plane did not have much use, and Gloria could only use it as a storage space. Only when it was built to the level of a dimensional fortress could the half-plane really play a great role. Many legendary wizards did not choose to stay in the material plane. Instead, they built their demi-plane into a gigantic sphere of another dimension and traveled through the endless multiverse. Speaking of this matter, Soren remembered an important piece of information that had recently been sent back from the Southern Wizard Alliance. The time was about 3 days ago. All of a sudden, a strange vibration occurred in the South Wizard City. Then, a huge spherical building suddenly appeared near the northwest city wall of the Wizard City. A great wizard from 300 years ago had returned to the material plane. Because Motor City's penetration into the Wizard City was still relatively weak, the channels to obtain information were quite limited. Therefore, the information sent to Soren was a bit vague. He could only confirm that it was a huge dimensional fortress. The owner of the fortress was an explorer of the astral world. 300 years ago, he was a great wizard who was in charge of one of the 3 major seats in the Wizard City. After this great wizard entered the realm of advanced legends, he spent his life's wealth to transform his half-bit wall into a huge extra-dimensional fortress. Then, he began his journey in the astral world. Just like that, 300 years had passed. During this period, the Wizard City was completely cut off from the Great Wizard, and no one knew which corner of the astral world this great wizard had wandered to. After all, a half-plane that had been strengthened to the level of a dimensional fortress could be regarded as a small floating city. If necessary, this great wizard could even transfer the dimensional sphere to other planes. If he was not afraid of death, he could directly teleport to a certain level of the abyss. Astral explorers were very powerful beings. The strength of advanced legends could only be said to have reached the threshold of entry because no one knew how many dangerous enemies they would encounter in the boundless sea of the astral world. There was a small accident when the dimensional sphere was teleported to the Wizard City. It seemed that a part of the half-bit wall had hit the wall of the Wizard City. According to the information obtained by Soren, the entire dimensional sphere was still in a sealed state, and the higher council of the Wizard City could not contact the inside of the half-bit wall. They could not confirm whether the great wizard who traveled in the astral world was still alive, and whether there were any abnormalities inside the dimensional space. Over the long years, the strong people born in the material plane had never given up on exploring the endless starry sky. During the battle with the ogres in Whiterun, the 2-headed ogre claimed to be the descendant of an explorer of the astral plane. The extra-dimensional sphere hit the wizard city. Incidents like this rarely happened in history. There was a record of a collision in Anmu a long time ago during the cataclysm. At the time, the demiplane's master had already fallen, forming an independent demiplane in the city of Anmu. Later on, this demiplane seemed to be destroyed for some reason. The wizard city now seemed to be preparing to gather people to open the gate of the extra-dimensional fortress, but because of the independence of the half-bit wall, they could not enter it for the time being. Some of the half-bit walls were left with special marks when they were created, and some could only be entered by the direct bloodline of the creator. Regarding this matter, Soren paid some attention to it. A great wizard who had wandered in the astral world for 300 years must have a lot of good things in his half-bit wall. However, without the correct way to open it, even the gods would find it difficult to enter it. Time passed day by day. As the barrier of the plane gradually weakened, the influence of other worlds on the material plane became more and more serious. There seemed to be traces of elemental life in the Frost Kingdom, and a terrible sandstorm had recently blown in the Death Desert. The attacks of the demons in the south never stopped, and the figures of the devils began to appear frequently in the eyes of the world. Compared to the less populated northern areas, the relatively dense population in the south was obviously more likely to attract the attention of the devils and demons. The Avatar crisis was gradually changing the whole world. Even the Treasure Island had bad news. In the process of mining gold, the miners actually dug out awakened earth elementals from the ground. No one knew how these earth elementals appeared. Fortunately, their number was very small, and only a dozen casualties were caused. There was not much time before the outbreak of the Golem War. The dwarves near Whiterun seemed to have made a big mistake. They dug too deep and actually dug out a sealed baler from the ground. Now the whole group of dark iron dwarves was in Sparta. There was no specific news yet, but it seemed that many dwarves had fled to other places. Calculating the time, it seemed that the dwarves were also going to suffer. This race was not large in the material plane, far less than the halflings who had the protection of the powerful Lord God. It was mentioned before that they had angered a very dangerous black dragon. According to the progress of time, it should be a month or two later. The new year had passed. But it seemed that no one had a good time this year. There was also news from Autumn Fall that the orcs and the gnolls, who had temporarily cooperated, seemed to have broken out in fierce conflicts. Eugene, who originally used the power of the gnolls to attack Autumn Fall, now had to deal with the crazy attacks of the gnolls. The ghouls were also active in it. For these things, Soren just paid attention and had no interest in intervening. There were too many legendary events that broke out during the Avatar crisis, and he couldn't manage them all. And calculating the progress of time, the god of light should almost fall. It was probably around March. There was also a group of very powerful gods that fell to the mortal world. They were the god of light, greater divine power, Yutaha, halfling goddess, greater divine power, Moradin, dwarf god, greater divine power, and so on. It was very interesting. These lords with greater divine power all built their divine kingdoms in the plain of Mountain Paradise. First of all, the god of light had always been the main god of Mountain Paradise after changing sides. Then Yutaha, the halfling goddess, had her divine kingdom in the third layer of Mountain Paradise, via a pearl-colored paradise. The divine kingdom of Moradin, the father of the dwarves, was on the fourth layer of Mountain Paradise. A place called Soul Furnace was located in the deepest part of the mountain range. It was his kingdom. Many of these gods that fell to the mortal world were greater divine powers. More than half of them came from Mountain Paradise, and Wild Field. The elven Lord God was not spared. In the last few batches, the elven god system should be the most unlucky because the Queen of Spiders had been waiting for them for a long time. On this day, Soren finally embarked on the journey to intervene in the Battle of the Golems. Chapter 711. The Battle of the Golems. This was a legendary event that broke out in the early days of the Avatar crisis. It was caused by an unknown adventurer team that went deep into a certain ruin near the Gobi. There were a large number of ancient ruins in the material plane. Originally, there was no problem in exploring the ruins. But for some reason, this ruin was preserved quite well. After this group of adventurers entered, they actually triggered the internal defense mechanism, causing a large number of golems buried in the ground to be activated. For some reason, they attacked any creature nearby. Soren did not have much memory of the Battle of the Golems, because he did not participate in the Battle of the Golems himself. At that time, he could barely fight the gnolls with his professional level. Only the top adventurers could join in, and it was only a relatively peripheral battle. Soren remembered that more than 600 people died at that time. Finally, one of the diamond golems was killed by the adventurers in the early days of the Avatar crisis. The Battle of the Golems broke out in the next area. Soren was not very clear about the specific location, but he knew that it was the periphery of the Arcane Empire. That was to say, this underground ruin was not formed by the fall of the floating city, but an ordinary city that was directly buried because of the disaster. In this battle, a legendary sword saint appeared. Soren vaguely remembered that this legendary sword saint did not seem to be from the south, but a practitioner from the east. There were many similarities between sword saints and monks. There were far fewer spellcasters in the east than on the mainland, but there were many other professions. The number of advanced sword saints, which was relatively rare on the mainland, also increased greatly in the east. Even the sword saints who practiced in the south would choose to travel to the east after reaching a certain level. Greater teleportation. With a flash of magic, Soren's figure appeared in the city called the Pearl of the Desert. The advantage of spellcasters in traveling was still much stronger than other professions, not to mention now that Soren's spellcasting ability had been greatly improved. The wizard profession level and the arcanist profession level were given a back door by a certain goddess. Although there were no additional abilities like the archmage advancement, he could already calculate spell slots according to the total profession level of 15. To put it simply, now, Soren had an additional level 8 spell slot in his class. However, of course, Soren had more than that. If it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't strong enough to master legendary level spells, he could have used the legendary level spell slot he had. Goddess of Magic's blessings, innate ability, as a spellcaster, you are one of the luckiest ones. The Goddess of Magic favors you. She opened a door for you within the magic net, allowing you to use the power of the magic net more easily. Your grasp of the weave has already far surpassed that of other spellcasters, and the mysteries of the inner layer of the weave are completely open to you. All spell slots +1, automatically granting magic mastery, spell penetration, and arcane proficiency. Soren had quite a few unique abilities. These included the blessing of the misfortune goddess and the blessing of the ocean goddess. However, these two blessings were only of a very low level. The abilities granted by the goddess of magic were far beyond the scope of these two blessings. To some extent, Soren had a part of the abilities of the chosen one. The +1 to all spell slots was only one of the powerful abilities. The three additional abilities, magic mastery, spell penetration, and arcane proficiency, were the truly powerful ones. This was equivalent to increasing Soren's spellcasting by more than 50%. Magic mastery could strengthen a spellcaster's ability to control spells. Spell penetration could increase the lethality and effect of all spells cast by the caster. Arcane proficiency could directly increase the spellcasting speed, and the ability to control spells would also be improved. Under normal circumstances, arcane proficiency was a unique ability that was very difficult to master. Unlike the last time he came here, Soren easily discovered that the city in the desert was now much more dilapidated. The terrible weather changes in the Desert of Death had seriously affected the eastern trade routes. There were basically no caravans coming and going now, so naturally, there were not many floating people. The streets looked a little empty. More than 30% of the shops had been closed. Even the patrolling guards were a little listless. Soren did not stay here. After confirming the direction, he rushed to the place where the Battle of the Golems broke out. How to deal with the Battle of the Golems was a problem. One was to wait until the time was up and see the situation after the Battle of the Golems broke out. The other was to solve the problem before the Battle of the Golems broke out. The difficulty of the latter was that Soren only knew the general direction but not the specific location. There were many ancient ruins in the desert. The core territory of the Arcane Empire was this barren desert. Although Soren had the map given by the paladin, he still lacked enough information. Master. Is the thing we're looking for here? In the yellow sand all over the sky, a group of people gradually approached the sand dune in front of them. This was an area bordered by the Gobi Desert. To the west was the territory of the orcs, and to the south was the junction of the human and elven kingdoms. Due to the influence of energy radiation, this land was not suitable for plant growth for thousands of years. Only some tenacious vegetation could be seen occasionally. It should be around here. The man walking in front of the group stopped. He was dressed with the characteristics of the Eastern Kingdom, but he looked like a northerner. He was tall and burly, with fair skin and large pores. The members of this group seemed to come from all over the world. Although they were dressed like northerners, several of them were northerners, and one or two looked like wanderers from the eastern coast. The one who spoke was an Eastern woman with a veil over her face. She was dressed like a dancer. Although she was wearing a cloak, one could still tell her profession. Beside her was a very tall woman. She had delicate skin, black hair, long legs, and a delicate face. Her body was slender and strong. She wore boxing gloves on her hands, and her hair was tied up with a ribbon. There were some special gadgets on her legs. A warrior monk. Or an advanced master of fist techniques. Due to the difference in civilization, it was very rare to see a female warrior monk in the south. It could even be said that there were almost none. However, there were still some in the Eastern Kingdom. The warrior monk's cultivation method was not suitable for women. It's around here. The leader stopped and said slowly, the thing that the Eastern Empress wants should be here. If we can find it, maybe there is a way to kill that ancient evil thing. Now that many of the seals have begun to loosen, the monastery can't waste too much energy on that thing. Chapter 7:12. It should be around here, right? Soren's figure slowly descended from the sky. He looked at the barren Gobi in front of him and murmured, I remember that the Battle of the Golems broke out in this area. When those golems went berserk, it began to spread to other places. Huh. Someone left traces. There seems to be a lot of them. It seems to be a team of adventurers. Tracking, clergy. As a god who controlled the tracking clergy, Soren found the traces left on the ground at a glance. These traces had been left more than a day ago. The sandstorm had buried most of the things, and even a legendary ranger might not be able to get much information. But all this was not a problem for Soren, who had mastered the tracking clergy. He could even judge the number of the team and the characteristics of some of them based on the traces that were almost buried by the sandstorm. There are a total of 16 people. Looking at the depth of these footprints, the weight is probably more than 500 pounds. Judging from the size of the footprints, the target should be a small or medium-sized creature. If I'm not wrong, it should be a relatively tall human. It's impossible for a human to leave such heavy footprints. If he didn't carry a lot of luggage, he should be a strong heavy armored warrior. Soren estimated that the person who could carry such a heavy load was at least a high-grade warrior. These traces are so shallow. As the tracking clergy was activated, Soren also saw some smaller traces and murmured, it doesn't seem to be left by the halflings. Their footsteps can't be so light. It seems to be a monk. It seems to be a team from the Eastern Kingdom. Strong. Many people. From the Eastern Kingdom. According to the information left behind by these traces, Soren gradually began to match the things in his memory. He activated the tracking clergy ability and looked for the direction of the team in a way similar to time backtracking. The tracking clergy could go back according to the traces left behind. Even if most of the traces had been buried by the sandstorm, Soren could still easily catch up with their pace. 3 hours later. A dark tunnel appeared in front of Soren. There were obvious signs of excavation, and there were a couple of torches on the wall. Looks like they've already gone in. When Soren thought of this, he didn't stay any longer. His figure instantly disappeared into the shadows, and he continued to go deeper into the tunnel. Broken stone pillars. Weathered walls. Even though it had been buried for thousands of years, the buildings from the Arcane Empire were still intact. Soren found traces of a battle, and it seemed that the team had run into some trouble. This is... Soren bent down and picked up a piece of carapace from the ground. There were some severed limbs around the carapace, and they were about the size of an adult's arm. There were strange patterns on the surface of the carapace, which looked like natural magic patterns. It was almost impossible for a normal creature to have a limb like this. In Soren's memory, there were only a few creatures that had something like this. A magical light appeared in his palm, and he muttered to himself, could it really be the Nell beetle? Nell beetle. Challenge rating, 10. Challenge difficulty, S, underground insectoids. Neutral. Mutated creatures. The number of insectoids in the multiverse was very large. Almost all the planes that could survive could be found with traces of the insectoids. There was even a demon lord of the insectoids in the bottomless abyss. The proliferation of mutated insectoids even caused a lot of trouble during the Arcane Empire and the Thorium era. However, after a few crises, many forces began to wipe out the insectoids. In the deepest part of the bottomless abyss, many demon lords were still guarding against the insectoids' counterattack. The demon-hunting spider was a creature created by the demon prince Demogorgon by extracting a part of the insectoid's abilities. The insectoids in the material plane were relatively rare, but they were a relatively common creature in the lower planes. If it's really the Nell beetle, it won't be easy to deal with. The ancient ruins of the Arcane Empire had a lot of energy radiation, so there were a lot of mutated creatures, and some very dangerous creatures were often born. The Nell beetle was one of them. This 10-legged beetle-like creature had a hard, bright red carapace. Its two sinister claws swayed in front of its 4 black round eyes and jagged jaws. Their huge mouthparts were very dangerous, and they communicated with each other through a kind of vibrato. The Nell beetle was a mutated giant beetle. A long time ago, it was distorted due to excessive exposure to shape-shifting magic and sound wave energy. Since the day they were created, these giant beetles with 12 legs would breed in their underground nest, building a huge and complicated tunnel system, just like an ant hill. They were creatures that could easily mutate. In areas with high energy radiation, it was very likely that new mutated creatures would be born. The reason Soren knew more about this was because Nell beetles were not rare in the Underdark. They were mindless hunters. Their only purpose in life was to reproduce and expand their nests. When the beetles in a nest overproduced, the Nell beetles would open up a new nest. It was known that Nell beetles were used as mounts by the races in the Underdark. The Earth Goblins had tamed them in the past, and several orc tribes had tried to do the same. The knights who rode Nell beetles in the Underdark would sometimes become the elite combat units of the tribes or cities they belonged to. A Nell beetle was usually about 9 feet long and weighed about 1,500 pounds. There are no traces of Earth Goblins. This place is not suitable for Earth Goblins to live. It seems that there is no passage to the Underdark. Soren looked around and confirmed that this was just a wild insect nest. The Nell beetle could be tamed as a mount. Creatures that could tame this kind of insect were not easy to deal with. Some powerful tribes and cities in the Underdark would control them. They were a very difficult native force to deal with. The wild ones are slightly better. Soren continued along the passage, but he was much more careful than before. An adult Nell beetle had 26 points of strength and 22 points of constitution. In terms of strength, it was comparable to a middle-grade demon in the abyss. If there were mutated creatures that were affected by energy radiation, then the danger level was even higher. The Nell beetle was extremely dangerous when used as a cavalry mount. Its collision force was even more terrifying than that of a drake. The drows had also tried to tame them. However, because it was not as easy as the petrifying lizards, they finally chose to give up. Buzz! A strange vibration suddenly came from the deeper part of the passage, followed by a piece of sand falling down crazily. Sound wave attack. The Nell beetle had the ability to attack with sound waves. It was a special attack that could not be defended by conventional means and could only be resisted by constitution. It seemed that those people had encountered a large number of Nell beetles. Otherwise, it would not be possible for even this place to be affected. Haste. Soren's figure instantly turned into a shadow and rushed out. The surrounding scenery was passing by quickly. There were some huge insect corpses in front of him, and 1 or 2 human corpses could be vaguely seen. This adventurer team had already suffered casualties. Phew. 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 In the rapid breathing, Dee retracted her hands. She moved her wrists and gently rubbed her temples. These damn insects. An oriental dancer with a dagger in her hand landed beside her. Her arm was bleeding. She looked a little embarrassed and said, "There are too many of them. We can't kill them all. We have to think of another way." Annoying insects. Not only did they have hard carapaces, but they could also send out strange sound wave attacks. There was no way to defend at all. If it were not for the strength of the adventurers present, they would have been directly cleared out by the sound waves. Dee's current state was not very good. As a pugilist, although she had legendary strength, it was still very difficult to deal with these Nell beetles by physical means. They were too difficult to fight. And although the monks had extremely strong magic resistance, the effect was not good in the face of sound wave attacks. If it were not for the other strong people in the team, they would have died this time. Do you remember the hall we passed before? At this time, a rogue in the team suddenly spoke. While dodging the attack of the Nell beetles, he shouted, "There seem to be a lot of golems there. Maybe they can still be activated. If they can be activated, we may be able to use them to deal with these damn insects." They had gradually approached the core area of the hive. Obviously, some things from the Arcane Empire were still preserved here. The rich energy radiation created such a large hive. Dee even suspected that what they were looking for was in the deepest part of the hive. Who knows alchemy? At this time, another person in the team spoke and shouted, "Those who know alchemy, go and try. We'll cover you and rush over. These insects can't be killed. If we continue to delay, I'm afraid we will all be killed by them." Buzz. Trembling noises could be heard coming from the tunnel ahead. They had no idea how many Nell beetles there were here. They had already killed 30 to 50 of them, and there seemed to be even more beetles rushing over from the other side of the tunnel. "I'll go." The oriental dancer at the back of the team suddenly jumped out and shouted to Dee next to her, "Cover me. I still have some understanding of alchemy. Maybe there is a way to activate those golems." There were not many spellcasters in the team. There were not many spellcasters in the entire Eastern Kingdom. The oriental dancer also had a certain amount of spellcasting ability. Many of them inherited the bloodline of the warlocks. Because she needed to use alchemy potions and study puppetry, the oriental dancer had good attainments in alchemy. In the Eastern Kingdom, the golems had evolved into another kind of puppetry. Chapter 713. As Soren went deeper and deeper, the underground passage became wider and wider. Some more complete buildings began to appear around him. At the same time, there were more tunnels dug out by Nell beetles. The width of these tunnels was more than 5 meters, and it seemed that this place had been dug into a huge underground network. At an intersection of the tunnels, there were traces of a battle on the ground, and there were 7 or 8 dead Nell beetles. There was a strange buzzing sound coming from afar. Soren's divine perception network found at least hundreds of beetles' traces. A large door appeared in front of him. This should be the entrance to the underground ruins. It's still well preserved. Soren entered the underground ruins. He reached out his hand and touched the runes left on the wall. He murmured, "It seems that the whole place was enchanted with magic. That's why it hasn't been damaged after thousands of years." Even during the Arcane Empire, not every building was enchanted. This should be a more important place, right? Rumble. There was a sound of something collapsing. Soren couldn't help but quicken his pace. After passing through a narrow tunnel, Soren's vision suddenly widened. He arrived at a very large hall. In front of him were piles of golems that hadn't been activated yet. At the front were a large number of clay golems. They were badly damaged, and many of them were eaten by insects. Less than 1/10 of them were still intact. However, the golems and iron golems at the back were more complete. It was estimated that more than 50% of them were still intact. It was just that he couldn't be sure if the internal parts were damaged or if they could be activated after energy was injected. This is... Soren found a faint light of magic in a corner. After touching it and triggering the magic, a magic scroll left behind by the Arcane Empire appeared in front of him. Insects. There are more and more insects. We have to kill the mother insect to get rid of all of this. The city hall has agreed to our plan. Capital. We're going to build a large golem factory. But it needs a lot of energy. We submitted an application to the Grand Arcanist Council. We asked them to build a large energy supply device for the city. But they refused. There's no other way. Those Grand Arcanists don't care about us at all. Now we have to take the risk. Part of the magic log was damaged, and Soren managed to decipher it with his divine ability, language proficiency. At the same time, he was able to guess what had happened. Although the Arcane Empire was extremely powerful, it still had many enemies. Deities were only one of them. During the time of the Arcane Empire, there was too much magic energy. The huge amount of energy attracted a large number of creatures who had a strong desire for magic energy. Not only did the magic sunflower that destroyed the Age of Thorium appear during the time of the Arcane Empire, even some mutated insectoids from other planes were attracted by the huge amount of energy. The large-scale development of the astral plane also attracted a lot of dangerous gazes from the depths of the multiverse. Therefore, during the Arcane Empire, large-scale alchemy research and development was carried out. The mana engine was also developed based on this point. Without the need for war, there would not be such large-scale research. The energy radiation is not low. Soren closed his eyes and sensed the energy radiation that still existed here after thousands of years. This kind of energy radiation was very harmful to ordinary creatures. It was almost the same as being exposed to more intense nuclear radiation. The radiation here had not been eliminated until now, which meant that there was still a relatively serious source of energy radiation left here. This was also the reason why Nell beetles multiplied here on a large scale and turned this place into an insectoid nest. Asterisk clack. Asterisk there was a noise in front of him. Someone's here. Soren suddenly raised his head and rushed over there. There was a smaller room behind the hall in front of him. At this moment, he saw a familiar figure. Soren was stunned and murmured, "It's her." Die. The Oriental dancer who had been in contact with Soren. At this moment, the Oriental dancer, who looked quite embarrassed and was still injured, was fiddling with a bunch of complicated mechanical devices that were still intact. When she triggered a button, the entire underground ruins suddenly shook. Then, he saw that the closed mana transmission devices were lit up, and the energy nodes were activated one by one. A huge source of radiation came from the depths of the underground ruins. In an instant, it was connected to the golem puppets in front of him through the energy transmission device. Energy nodes activated. Transmit energy. Golem army activated. Insectoid nest found. Elimination plan activated. Infected found. Ziz. Eliminate the infected. Eliminate the invaders. Ziz. Radiation source found. Activate the final defense plan. Activate the kill order. A series of electric sparks appeared. Soren didn't even have time to stop her. He saw a series of electric sparks burst out of the mechanical devices near her, and then there was a red alarm light. The energy transmission devices around her exploded directly because they were too old. The mechanical sound from one of the devices finally turned into a series of harsh alarms. Damn it! Has the battle of the golem started? Soren found that he seemed to be a step late. Although these golem puppets had not left the underground ruins for the time being, with the emergence of light, all the golem puppets in the hall that were relatively intact moved. Eliminate the invaders. Eliminate the infected. Eliminate the mutant insectoids. Eliminate all enemies. Rumble. The stone wall at the back of the hall suddenly began to cave in. Then, in the deep darkness, dense lights appeared. Soren's current location was just one of the places where the golem puppets were stored. There were many golem halls inside the underground ruins. The Arcane Empire was very dependent on the golem puppets. Even the guards inside the floating city were arcane puppets. The golem puppets replaced most of the labor force. In the most glorious period of the Arcane Empire, even most families had relatively cheap clay golems. Eliminate the invaders. A golem that was clearly broken suddenly rushed over. Its arm was completely damaged, but the energy core inside was still running. At this moment, there was a dangerous red light in its eyes, and it directly punched toward Soren. There was a problem with the operation program here. Soren was not sure whether there was a thaling responsible for operation inside this large golem factory. If there was no thaling responsible for maintenance, then the order after activation could not be changed at all. How could this be? The Oriental dancer's face was also full of horror at this moment. She had never thought that such a thing would happen after activating the golem puppets. As a special profession in the Eastern Kingdom, the professional characteristics of the Oriental dancer were a bit like that of a bard. It was a special advanced profession that could be used for both close combat and spellcasting. Most of them had a trace of warlock's blood and were also proficient in a certain amount of alchemy. This was because many Oriental dancers had mastered a unique puppet technique, which was another way to make golem puppets. Relying on her half-understood ability, although she successfully activated the golem puppets here, it seemed that she did not let them execute the correct command when activating them. It was estimated that entering the correct command might not be useful. This ruin had been buried for too long. Gotcha. Soren frowned and dodged the attack of the golem. Then he punched the golem in the chest. The powerful force shattered its energy core, and the golem in front of him completely collapsed in an instant. A row of data appeared in front of him, killed the golem. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 2100 slaughter EXP. In just a short while, the entire hall was in chaos. Passages were opened all around, and then all kinds of golem puppets came out from various storage halls. Clay golem, iron golem, flesh golem, diamond golem. In the deepest part of the hall, Soren even felt a trace of draconic aura. This was an ancient golem device. The manufacturing process was similar to the flesh golem. Its name was dragon skeleton golem. It was a puppet life made from the bones of an adult dragon. Apart from that, the figures of some arcane guardians also appeared in the surroundings. They were the more difficult arcane golems to challenge. Let's go. Soren's figure suddenly appeared beside the Oriental dancer. He grabbed her and rushed to the side passage. The other party was obviously stiff when Soren appeared. When she heard a slightly familiar voice, she relaxed a little. At this time, hundreds of golem puppets had been activated behind them. According to the instructions set when they were made, most of the golems began to enter the passage dug by the Nell beetles. Destroy the Zerg. Found the Zerg nest. Attack. Clear. Found the source of radiation. Found the Zerg nest. Destroy the Zerg queen. Sizzle. The buzzing of the Nell beetles sounded. Some places in the underground ruins had seriously collapsed. In the Zerg passage, the golem puppets had been fighting with them. These dangerous Zerg were still not weak against a large number of golems, but when the diamond golems in the rear began to join the battle, the situation gradually changed. Soren did not know how many golem puppets had been activated. According to such a large golem factory, the configuration of the golem army during the Arcane Empire, and the prevalence of golem puppets during the Arcane Empire, there were at least 2,000 or 3,000 golem puppets that could be active at present. Chapter 7:14. It's you? The expression of the Oriental dancer seemed to be a little unbelievable, but after remembering the identity of Soren, she bowed slightly and said with a hint of nervousness and excitement, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But why are you here, sir? Oh my God. I saw a true God. Maybe it was because she had been in contact with Soren. Although the Oriental dancer was very excited, she did not lose her composure too much. With Soren's current 150 legendary points, he had almost reached the limit of the material plane. Even legendary events could hardly improve his reputation. He was now known by everyone in the material plane. Whether it was the eastern countries or the outer islands, Soren's reputation had spread to every corner. Otherwise, the island countries in the south would not have been beaten like that and not dared to retaliate. Now if he wanted to continue to improve his legendary points, he was afraid that he could only involve the struggle of the plane. Compared with other gods who fell to the mortal world, perhaps Soren, who became a god as a mortal, was more memorable. Don't reveal my identity. Soren didn't want others to know his identity as a true god. He just saved her casually. Because he had cooperated with the Oriental dancer once, he had a good impression of the woman in front of him. If it was within his power, he wouldn't mind helping her out a little. When he got the anti-detection cloak, that was comparable to a divine artifact, she helped him a lot. Understood. The Oriental dancer nodded quickly. To be honest, after that adventure, she had been paying attention to any news related to Soren, but the information collected was still beyond her expectations. She always thought that the Oriental princess was the most powerful person she had ever seen. She didn't expect Soren to be more powerful than the Oriental princess. A mortal becoming a god. Such a thing was almost unimaginable for her. Time was limited. The golems in the underground ruins had been activated on a large scale. Soren couldn't waste too much time, so he said directly, Why are you here? What's the purpose of coming here? A larger battle had broken out. Due to the mutated radiation in the depths of the underground ruins, the scale of the beetle nest was rather large. Densely packed Nell beetles appeared one after another, successfully blocking the attacks of the golem army. It seemed that the intensity of the battle between the golems had been reduced because of the need to eliminate these insects. Otherwise, with so many golems rushing out, it would not be a problem to wipe out a duchy. The alchemy technology of the Arcane Empire was not something that could be compared to now. A small team of iron golems was enough to defeat a regular army. In Gloria's Adept Tower, there were only a dozen or so iron golems as the highest level of guards. There was not even a single diamond golem. The seal of the Wailing Wall Monastery has been broken by some unknown power. The Oriental dancer also knew that time was pressing, so she directly revealed the information that could not be easily told to outsiders. She hurriedly said, There is a very terrible ancient evil thing sealed below. The martial monks of the monastery are asking for help from the Eastern Empress. The Eastern Princess sent Dee and me here to look for an important thing. She hopes to destroy it with the help of something from the Arcane Empire. Ancient evil creature? Eastern Princess? Wailing Wall? Soren quickly guessed something and murmured, Did those damn things run out? He had once traveled to the Eastern Kingdom. Basically, the legendary professions had to go to the Eastern Kingdom at that time. Otherwise, they would not be able to brag with others. Moreover, the challenge level of the Eastern Kingdom was obviously higher than here. The Eastern Princess. She was a very mysterious and very powerful woman. In terms of profession characteristics, the Eastern Princess was a bit like the Helpheimer, because both of them were a jack of all trades. However, the Eastern Princess was much more powerful than the Helpheimer. She was the top legendary figure in the entire Eastern Kingdom. The profession level of the dancer was definitely above level 30, and she was one of the few existences in the material plane who had the ability to fight with the gods and saints. The Eastern Princess secretly controlled more than 70% of the places for pleasure in the Eastern Kingdom. Whether it was wealth or status, she was comparable to Soren. Her influence in the Eastern Kingdom was almost the same as Soren's influence in the South Coast. The only difference was that the Eastern Princess was not a god. Because of the destruction of the Arcane Empire, the Eastern Kingdom, as a heavily damaged area, did not receive much influence from the gods. The monastery had always been the core power. Die? A weak female voice suddenly sounded not far away. Soren looked up and saw the female fist master that he had briefly fought with. At that time, Soren did not have absolute confidence that he could defeat her, but now the gap between the two was huge. Dee had injuries on her body. Although the riot of the golem puppets suddenly reduced the pressure on them, because they carried out some kind of killing order, they also became the targets of the golem puppets. The situation did not improve much. Under the large-scale attack of the golem puppets, many of the adventurers were scattered. At this moment, they did not know where the others had retreated to. They could only see insects and golems fighting everywhere, and there were still insects crawling out from the depths of the ground. Come with me. Soren still did not want the golem war to break out. The pressure on the material plane was already very great. If the golem war broke out, the nearby areas would definitely be seriously affected. Besides, Soren still had some ideas about these golems. He wanted to try to see if he could cut off their operation core. These golems were inputted with special instructions when they were made, but the instructions were not completely unchangeable. If they could be stopped, Soren would find a way to transport them back to Mordor City, and Gloria could disassemble them one by one. At that time, the instructions could be reset. There was a very strong energy reaction in the deepest part of the underground passage. Soren wondered if there was something similar to a power station below. If the energy core of the floating city was compared to a nuclear power plant, then the energy supply used by ordinary cities during the Arcane Empire should be a large power station. The gap between the Arcane Empire and the Interstellar Era was not as big as imagined. The differences in civilization may cause some differences, but because of the foundation of energy supply, there were still things like electric lights. In other words, the crystal lamps in the ruins should be called magic lamps. These things were completely damaged, but Soren could see the remaining crystal lines. Before the city was buried, these lines must be connected to a stable energy supply source. This way. There were many lavender crystal pipes in the underground ruins. They were connected to each other like cables. The golem factory in the war chess plane also had the same thing. Gloria had broken them up to complete the magic circuit in the laboratory today. This was a special kind of synthetic crystal, a bit similar to artificial crystal. It could withstand a good amount of magic transmission and was used to make simpler magic circuits. In the larger buildings in the ruins, there would also be a large diamond-shaped lavender crystal. This thing was like a transformer or something else. These crystals had been seriously damaged, and there were tiny runes left inside by extremely high alchemy craftsmanship. The Arcane Empire once explored the astral plane on a large scale. They brought back many strange substances from the multiverse and combined many things that did not exist in the material plane. The resources of the material plane alone could not support such a glorious civilization. Stone to mud. The passage ahead was blocked, and the underground ruins collapsed because of the battle, but this was nothing for a spellcaster. The melee professions might need to dig through, but Soren's spellcasting ability had skyrocketed. A stone to mud directly melted the wall in front of him. According to the experience of exploring underground ruins in the past, Soren remembered a total of 3 stone to mud spells. At the same time, he also prepared a stone to mud and a mud to stone spell scroll. ZZZ. Some larger Nell beetles appeared in the passage ahead. Their twisted and mutated bodies had more sharp barbs, and the lines on the surface of the carapace were more dense. It seemed that they had been severely affected by radiation all year round. Ignore them. Soren looked at the Oriental dancer and the pugilist who were ready for battle and tore a spell scroll. Mud to stone. A solid stone wall appeared in front of them, directly blocking the passage of the Nell beetles. There was a violent impact on the wall, but even with their strength, they could not break it in a short time. These 2 non-damaging spells had great effect in the underground ruins. Go straight down from here. The battle had become more and more intense. Thousands of zergs and golems were fighting together, and there were sharp alarms everywhere. Soren stomped to test the thickness of the ground, and then said to the two beside him, "Be careful. We'll go straight down. Stone to mud. Stone to mud." The light of two spells appeared, and Soren directly turned the more than 10 meters thick rock layer under his feet into soft mud. Then with a stomp, their figures fell out of thin air, and there was a sound of collapse below. Boom! A barrier opened and bounced the falling rocks and mud away. When the Oriental dancer looked up and saw the surroundings, they had fallen deeper into the Zerg's nest. At this time, there were not many Nell beetles. Many Nell beetles had been attracted by the battle above, and there were no insects in the passage below. This way. Soren frowned and quickened his pace. The passage dug by the Zergs in front was getting bigger and bigger. When the disgusting mucus began to appear in sight, dense beetles appeared in a hall in front of them. They were close to the position of the Zerg queen. Hundreds of Nell beetles in front of them were guarding a passage behind them, which should be directly below the center of the underground ruins. When they found their traces, in a sharp trembling sound, these huge insects rushed over quickly. Too many. The Oriental dancer's voice was a little trembling, and he looked very nervous. Although they were not weak, the challenge level of Nell beetles was not low either. The number of hundreds was enough to easily drown them. Now they could only put all their hopes on Soren. Soren also had a headache. Because the number of insects was too much, and there were more insects rushing over to protect the Zerg queen. It was true that he was a god. But the god in the form of a saint was weakened too much. Otherwise, there would not be so many gods that were killed by the human wave tactic. These Nell beetles' vitality was as high as 200 points. Coupled with their hard shells and tenacious vitality, Soren needed 2 slashes to kill each of them. If they rushed over, Soren's life might not be in danger, but the 2 women behind him might die. There was no other way. In this case, he could only use his ultimate skill. Soren still had a lot of ultimate skills, and there were also powerful group attack spells. However, it was impossible to kill so many mutated Zergs in front of him in one shot. Their vitality was too tenacious. If he used his divine power points, 2 divine power shockwaves would be enough. But the divine power points were too precious, and it was not worth wasting them here. Therefore, Soren chose the most efficient and most economical ultimate skill. Let the flames purify everything. Chapter 7:15. Summon Demon. Protection from evil. Because there were other people around, Soren could not completely expose his trump card, so when the insect attacked, he also instantly cast 2 spells as a cover. With the spread of a huge energy, a huge magic circle appeared in front of the 3 people. The reason why it was huge was that the demon summoned by Soren was also a little big. Before it completely appeared in front of everyone, the temperature in the entire hive began to rise sharply, and even the sand and stones showed signs of gradually melting. Could it be a Baylor? As the most famous high-grade demon in the abyss, the Baylor had always appeared frequently in folklore. In many non-mythical stories, the final enemy faced by the legendary protagonist was always this terrible existence. Over the long years, the Baylor had always been one of the popular big bosses in the legendary stories. So when the scorching breath appeared, the 2 women behind Soren guessed what was summoned. The Baylor was not among the demons that were commonly summoned. Generally speaking, only legendary summoning spells could summon the Baylor, and there was only a certain probability. Most of them summoned low-grade Baylors, soul judgment demons, assassin demons, and so on. Although the Oriental dancer was shocked, there was nothing strange about it. Soren's identity was a god. It was not surprising that a god could summon a Baylor with a summoning spell. Perhaps for her, gods were beyond her own understanding, but in fact, it was not so easy for even an evil god to summon a Baylor. The status of the Baylor in the abyss was not lower than that of the higher archangels in the upper plane. The average summoning spell was only about a soul judgment demon with legendary strength. Let the flame purify everything. Die. Insect. The raging fire enveloped this space. The moment the demon Sauron was summoned to the material plane, he raised his hand and threw out a fireball the size of a wash basin. His figure was completely shrouded in flames. From the outside, he looked like a burning human-shaped flame. Although he was still in the form of a Baelor, as a demon lord, after completely integrating with the power of the abyss in the Galumba arena, his strength was not inferior to the other Baelors. During this period of time, the demon Sauron had been in an incubation period. On one hand, he was recruiting more fighters. On the other hand, he was fusing with the rule power unique to the bottomless abyss. Rumble. A violent explosion sounded in front of them. The fireball spell cast by the Balrog was directly linked to the creature's level. This meant that when casting the fireball spell, Sauron's spellcaster level was above 24, and the damage of the spell would not be lower than a single meteor burst. Sauron could instantly cast fireball 5 times a day. At this moment, he tossed them all out, blasting the sea of beetles into pieces. The huge explosion caused a part of the beetle nest to collapse, burying a portion of the Nell beetles underground. In terms of strength, Sorin's body was naturally stronger. However, in terms of AoE attacks, the demon, Sauron's demonic form had too much of an advantage. After a round of fireball bombardment ended, the demon, Sauron raised his hand and pulled out the Beheader greatsword. Then, he grabbed the flames with his other hand and formed a flame whip. The raging flames shrouded an area of more than 10 meters. As long as the enemy got close to the flame body, they would be continuously burned. In just a few seconds, dozens of beetles in front of them died. So powerful. The flame Baelor is too frightening. The two ladies could not tell the difference between the Baelor and the Baelor, but it was not important. What was important was that they finally saw the strength of the top demons in the bottomless abyss. It was far more frightening than the stories. Retreat. Leave the rest to him. The demon, Sauron's demon avatar, was killing in front of them. Sorin did not have much intention to participate in the battle at this moment. Because when the demon, Sauron, blasted out the first fireball, a row of data appeared in front of him: Nell beetle killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 3,600 slaughter EXP. Nell beetle killed, mutant. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 4,500 slaughter EXP. Nell beetle killed, elite. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 5,600 slaughter EXP. A steady stream of slaughter EXP was being absorbed into Sorin's body. Maybe it was because this was not the bottomless abyss, or maybe it was because the distance between the demon, Sauron, and his avatar was very close. This time, not only did the demon, Sauron kill provide the demon, Sauron with slaughter EXP, but the ratio was also quite large. According to Sorin's own calculations, it should have reached about 70% of the demon, Sauron's kills. The demon, Sauron's efficiency of clearing the area was several times higher than Sorin's. The hundreds of Nell beetles did not last long, and more than half of them were killed. However, at this time, because the queen beetle was in danger, some of the beetles that were blocking the golem puppets had already rushed over, and more Nell beetles appeared from all directions. What if I clear all of them? I'm afraid I can get about 1 million slaughter EXP. There were not many places in the material plane where slaughter EXP could be gained, and such a large swarm of beetles was even rarer. If they all ran out, it would not be difficult to destroy a city. Sorin now had fewer and fewer ways to gain slaughter EXP because there was a hierarchy in the group of creatures. It was difficult to gather a large number of high-grade creatures in the material plane, and killing too many could easily destroy the balance and affect one's own faction. Although Sorin was in the evil faction, he could not let himself deviate to the extent of being too evil. For example, when dealing with the indigenous people, Sorin tried to enslave them as much as possible instead of killing them. Otherwise, his image in the eyes of the gods would not be good. Since he planned to clear all of these beetles, Sorin had to do it himself. Greater haste. Sorin still had some spell slots reserved for the following situation, so he directly cast Greater Haste and rushed out. The Oriental dancer and Dee also acted at the same time and blocked the left side of the passage together. Dee's strength should have entered the legendary realm not long ago, and the hidden power of a pugilist had a great advantage in dealing with these creatures with hard shells. The main force to clear the area was still the demon. Sauron's target was the elite units that had further mutated. Sizzle. A large number of beetles fell, and the slaughter EXP gained by Sauron also increased crazily. In a short time, it reached nearly 500,000 points. When the number of beetles became fewer and fewer, suddenly there was a mental wave from the nest behind, and then all the beetles receded like a tide. The queen beetle is in front. The rest of the beetles retreated to the back of the cave. Sauron looked around vigilantly, and then let the demon, Sauron, take the lead. Chapter 7:16. A gentle night breeze blew against his face. When Sauron opened his eyes, he saw everything that was very familiar to him. A simple house, old bedding, and a faint smell of decay in the air. The room was very small. There was almost no furniture. A simple stove was in the corner, and the rice jar was empty. There were only a few pieces of hard black bread on the cupboard. Sauron slowly sat up. His expression was a little strange. After looking around carefully, he pushed open the half-closed door. The sunlight suddenly stung his eyes, and there was a clamor of people outside. Amber City. The slums. Everything was just like what he remembered. The low houses were connected together, and there were people walking outside from time to time. He could even hear the sound of laborers moving goods from afar. Big brother. A clear child's voice rang in his ears. Sauron turned around and saw little Vivian. Vivian was even younger than what he remembered. She was only 4 or 5 years old. She was wearing old clothes that were adapted from adult clothes. Her delicate little face was stained with dust. Behind her was a strong hound, and there was a rabbit in the hound's mouth. During those years, Heath was still young. From time to time, he would go out and bring back prey. Big brother? Are you not feeling well? Mom will be back soon. Let's go prepare dinner. Vivian's eyes seemed to be a little timid. She seemed to feel that Sauron was a little strange today. She reached out her little hand and grabbed Sauron's palm. She seemed to be worried. What's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Sauron was silent. Then he reached out and hugged the little girl in front of him, gently stroking her long hair. At this time, there was a commotion outside, followed by a young woman running in with messy footsteps, shouting, "Oh no! Not good! Sauron! Your mother, she. The woman looked at little Vivian, and she seemed to be unable to speak. Sauron looked at her silently, and then slowly said, "Dead? Dead." His tone was very calm. The woman in front of him was stunned by Sauron's calmness, as if she didn't know what to say. Interesting. Sauron looked up at the sky, then turned around and walked towards the door. Bottomless abyss, blood pool. In front of him was a dense swarm of worms. Every day, many souls from the various planes of the multiverse would fall here. Some of them were transported deeper by the Nether River, but many were assimilated by the power of the bottomless abyss, ultimately becoming abyssal worms born in the blood pool. Cruelty was everywhere in this plane. The newborn abyssal worms had to adapt to killing, or they would become food for the growth of other worms. Sauron was the strongest one. He was almost reaching the limit of the abyssal worm. For example, he was only one step away from transforming into a low-level demon. Not far from him was a huge mother worm. It slowly moved around the abyssal blood pool, not caring about the killing of the worms. The newborn abyssal worms didn't have much intelligence. Even though Sauron was already the most powerful one, there were still some ignorant guys who came to provoke him. There was no doubt that they were all easily crushed by Sauron. Interesting. Sauron's eyes became cold as he slowly moved towards a place. Dreams. For most intelligent creatures, dreams were a normal part of their lives. Basically, all intelligent creatures would dream, even the undead were the same. Dreams were a very wonderful world because most creatures didn't know they were dreaming when they were dreaming. In this case, when the dream went deep to a certain extent, or when they were about to wake up due to external interference, they would suddenly realize that they were dreaming. Soren was also dreaming. This was simply inconceivable. Because as a god, it was almost impossible to drag him into a dream, and it was even more difficult to make him not know that he was dreaming when he was dreaming. If the demon incarnation didn't appear, perhaps Soren would have fallen here. But because the demon incarnation also fell into the dream, the situation became very interesting. Soren was now having two dreams at the same time. One was Soren's dream. The time was many years ago, the location was Amber City, the slums. His mother had just died, and he had no one to rely on with Vivian. The second dream was Sauron's. The time was half a year ago, when Sauron was just born. He was just an abyssal worm, and also when the demon incarnation was at its weakest. It was a very interesting point. Both dreams were when Soren was at his weakest. At that time, he was just a low-level thief in Amber City. He was young and had a sister, and he had no one to rely on. Sauron was just a strong abyssal worm, and any demon in the abyss could crush him. The dream was man-made. There was no doubt that the other party used some kind of power to awaken Soren's memory, and then made him enter the dream when he was at his weakest. As far as Soren knew, there were very few creatures in the entire multiverse that could do this. He seemed to have come across something interesting. The dream was changing. There was an invisible murderous intent hidden in it. Soren didn't know when, but he noticed that the guards were looking at him with malicious eyes, and the people around him seemed to be full of hostility. There was a commotion among the worms near the abyssal blood pool. They seemed to have sensed the danger of Sauron, and they stopped fighting and started to swarm toward him. The wandering mother worm stopped its huge body and faintly began to look at the tiny newborn. Murderous intent emerged. At this moment, Soren suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Break for me! Slaughter, domain. Evil, domain. Shadow, domain." A series of domain powers were activated, and in an instant, everything in front of him was fragmented. Looking at the entire multiverse, there was only one ability that could drag the gods into the dream. Dream, domain. Everything had completely disappeared. When Soren opened his eyes again, he saw a huge worm, the kind of twisted mutated worm that looked like a pupa. Beside him were the Oriental dancer, Butterfly, and the pugilist, D, but at this moment, both of them were in the dream, and their faces were still full of nightmarish expressions. The offspring of the dream chrysalis? I didn't expect the Zerg to even integrate the ability of the abomination. Soren, who woke up from the dream, felt a strong spiritual power and the residual, dream, domain. Such a domain was rare in the multiverse, but there was a kind of abomination that had this ability. Even deities would find it difficult to resist their power. Chapter 7:17. There were many creatures that could drag a person into a dream. For example, the incubus and the old hag. However, the dream abilities of these creatures were only effective against mortals. For a god like Soren, it was almost impossible to drag him into a dream. In the entire multiverse, there were very few creatures that could drag Soren into a dream, and there was only one that was most likely to happen. Dream chrysalis, abomination. No one knew how the dream chrysalis was born. Legend had it that they were the illegitimate children of the god of fantasy, desire, and dreams. This god had long disappeared in the long river of history. At least Soren had never heard of this god. However, the dream chrysalis were still left behind. They were more dangerous than the gods. Because they were abominations. The dream chrysalis did not have a specific shape. They could even change their shape like in a dream. For abominations, it was not difficult to master the ability of form change. In the long years, the dream chrysalis were sealed in the deepest part of the multiverse. The gods did not dare to take any abominations lightly because some abominations were even born with more power than the gods. The dream chrysalis could kill people just by looking at them, but that did not include those with powerful willpower. There were traces of them in the bottomless abyss, but it seemed that they were later destroyed by some demon lords. Because even the demon lords were deeply afraid of the incubus, they did not want to have such dangerous creatures around them. The dream chrysalis could firmly control the enemy and transport their bodies into a temporary special nightmare that had been prepared by the Lord. This was an ability that was close to a real dream. If one died in it, it would directly trigger a test of death. If one could not pass the test of willpower, they would die with the dream. They had special domain power. This power could even switch reality and dream, and even turn reality into a nightmare when necessary. The creature in front of him was not a dream chrysalis. The real dream chrysalis was level 31, and the challenge difficulty was A, which meant that a team of super adventurers with a profession level of level 31 and above was needed to completely defeat this abomination. This challenge difficulty was far higher than that of the ancient dragon, and even higher than that of many gods. If Soren was facing a dream chrysalis, then he could only defeat it in the form of a god. In front of him was a descendant of the dream chrysalis. In other words, it was the insectoid queen that possessed a part of the divine abomination's bloodline. Soren could even sense a hint of demonic aura from the bottomless abyss. There were several insectoid overlords in the bottomless abyss. Long before the rise of the Orbis demons, there were traces of Zerg activity in the bottomless abyss. Many demons borrowed the Zerg's genes to transform their forms, and as time passed, many Zerg overlords became demon overlords. Pupa. This word represented a very dangerous demon lord in the abyss. Soren could sense that the insectoid queen in front of him was his descendant, or rather, the descendant of the insectoid queen and the dream chrysalis bloodline. It was an evil creature that had inherited the power of the abomination. Wake up. Soren opened the divine force field and directly released his spiritual power in the posture of a god. In an instant, his spiritual power rushed into the hearts of the Oriental dancer, Butterfly and the Fist Master, D like a torrent, and then turned into rolling thunder and woke them up from their dreams. No. No. The Oriental dancer let out a shrill scream, and then suddenly opened her eyes. Her expression was blank for a moment, and then she realized that everything just now was just a dream. D's state was better. As a Fist Master, she was very calm and reacted very quickly that everything was a dream. Where is this? D was ready for battle in an instant. She stared at the huge and ferocious worm in front of her and said slowly, "Did we just get hit by its spell?" Soren looked back at her and said lightly, "It's not a spell, it's a territory." The insectoid queen's nest. The space inside the nest was not very large, only about 50 meters in diameter. In contrast, the body of the insectoid queen, which was more than 10 meters long, had already occupied a large area. There were many strange lavender crystals nearby, which looked similar to those in the ancient ruins, but at the moment, they were all emitting a faint light and connected together in some way. Directly above should be an important place in the ancient ruins, because there was very rich radiation energy here. Even a data prompt appeared in front of Soren's eyes, affected by high concentration of radiation. Test of self-immunity triggered. Physique immunity passed. You are immune to the physical damage of the radiation. Soren's physique was naturally fine. But after a while, the Oriental dancer, Butterfly's face was a little pale, and she seemed to be uncomfortable. As a Fist Master, D's resistance was very high, so she was not affected at all. At the moment, she was looking at the inside of the nest. When her eyes fell on a pale golden stone, she couldn't help but be excited and said, "Alchemy stone." Butterfly. The thing Your Excellency wants is really here. In the center of the nest. There were strange crystals from the arcane empire scattered around, and the most eye-catching one was a pale golden stone the size of a fist. Alchemy stone. Or it could also be called Sorcerer's Stone. It was a high-level alchemy substance developed during the Arcane Empire. It had very powerful energy and could be used to extend one's life. In a way that did not require the transformation of a lich, it could extend one's life to a quite amazing extent. There were many ways for wizards to extend their lives. integrating the blood of other races, transforming one's own body, transforming into an alchemy life, or becoming a lich, and so on. These methods more or less had some disadvantages. Some of them could no longer be considered human after completion. In order to pursue a more effective way to change one's life, the study of alchemy stone had begun since the Silver Age. The alchemists pursued a near-perfect way to extend one's life in a human form. Because of this, the ancient Normans were born with a lifespan of more than 300 years, Silver Age. This kind of alchemy had been passed down for a long time. The desire for life made a lot of research during the Arcane Empire. Alchemy stone was one of the most effective results. Alchemy stone? Isn't this thing used to extend one's life? Although it has the effect of storing mana, it doesn't seem to have much effect on sealing evil things, right? Is the Oriental princess about to die? No. There are many longevity abilities in the Eastern Kingdom. The Oriental princess's life can't be so short. Or does someone need to use it to extend their life? Or to make up for lost life because of some reason? This thing shouldn't be used directly to seal ancient evil things, right? For a moment, many thoughts flashed through Soren's mind. The alchemy stone had a wide range of uses. Even the Northern Witch Council had the corresponding research because witch divination was very easy to reduce one's lifespan. The Eye of the North had an alchemy stone in her hands. Is someone planning to use their life to seal ancient evil things? This kind of thing seemed to have happened in history. There was a very famous ascetic monk in the Eastern Kingdom who used his entire life to seal one of the ancient evil things. This ascetic monk, whose profession level was as high as 31, directly passed away after sealing the ancient evil thing. The Eastern Kingdom had many special and mysterious powers, and the civilization they inherited had a lot of profound background. Be careful. Perhaps because the alchemy stone was too important to them, Dee directly launched an attack after discovering it. She intended to attract the attention of the queen insect from the side and then take the alchemy stone in front. Plop. The queen insect's body was extremely bloated and did not move at all. Its long life had made its body too fat, and its physical functions had been reduced to the point where it could barely survive. What replaced it was another kind of power that was crazily increasing. Psionic power. Basically, all abilities could be classified as psionic power. The name was just a code name, just like the creatures in the astral world like to call psionic power as psionic power. Dee hit an invisible energy barrier, and then her whole body was bounced back. Fortunately, her skills were extraordinary. Her toes touched the wall, and she turned to avoid the next attack. A half-meter deep dent appeared behind her out of thin air. The powerful psionic power instantly shattered the matter, causing half of the wall to collapse. You go out first. Soren glanced at the oriental dancer behind him and said slowly, "This is a legendary creature. And it's the bloodline of the abomination. You can't help if you stay here." Hey! That fist master. You don't have to be impulsive. This insect is definitely more difficult to deal with than you think. Let's deal with it first and then think about other things. Two mortals. With their ability, they could not see the bloodline of the abomination in the queen insect, so Soren had to remind them. The oriental dancer's expression was a little conflicted. She was not reconciled with her inability to participate in the next battle, but at this time, Dee turned to look at her and whispered, "Die. You go out first. This thing is very dangerous." This was a battle of the legendary level. Any creature below the legendary level would die. If it weren't for the fear of Soren's divine aura, they would have paid most of their attention to Soren. Otherwise, the two women would have died long ago. It would be easier for the golem to kill this thing, right? The challenge level of the queen insect in front of him was probably above 22. With such a strong psionic energy, it would not be much easier to fight it than to fight a Baylor. Because of its special dream ability, the danger was probably higher. However, the golem was very good at restraining this creature, because even the dream chrysalis could hardly affect the golem puppet without intelligence. However, Soren could not let the golems deal with it because the brood mother had the power of divinity. An enemy with divine power. This was of great value to Soren. Chapter 7:18. Shadow, Realm. The best way to deal with the realm ability was to open another realm and let the power of the two realms collide and distort, which would eventually interfere with each other's realms. As Soren opened the shadow realm, the surrounding reflections suddenly overlapped, and the light gradually dimmed. Everything within the range of Soren's realm seemed to be stained with a touch of gray color. It was as if the scene had suddenly shifted from the material plane to the shadow realm. Bzzz. A sharp tearing sound came, and the queen finally couldn't stand the pressure brought by Soren and attacked first. The target was Soren. Compared to the others, Sauron was the biggest threat to it. Sound wave attack. It was the most difficult attack to defend against. Soren didn't have any spells to defend against sound attacks, so he could only rely on his own physique and tenacity to resist. He was a little better, but a trace of blood flowed from the corner of Dee's mouth because of the impact. Entangle. The first to attack was the demon incarnation. As one of the high-grade demons, the Balrog was more reliable than many legendary meat shields. Sauron raised his hand and raised the flame whip, and then instantly entangled the enemy in front of him. Then, the demon wings flapped and swooped close to the queen. He swung the huge beheading sword and slashed down. Clang! The flaming sword stopped about 30 centimeters away from the broodmother, and a solid psionic force field blocked the attack of the demon incarnation. The queen's body had declined to the point where it was difficult to even move. Instead, it was replaced by a more powerful mental ability. The strength of the psionic shield was a bit high, and it didn't show any signs of loosening after taking the full blow of the demon incarnation. However, under the burning of the flame body, the psionic shield was constantly being weakened. This kind of shield could protect most of the damage. But because of this, the range of effect of the flame body was stronger than the frontal attack when it weakened the psionic shield. The range of the flame body was very large, and when it was close to the queen, the burning range was also very large. The queen's psionic shield suffered several times the damage. Greater haste. Bull's strength. Cat's grace. Greater dispel magic. Soren's spellcasting speed was no longer what it used to be. With the blessing of the goddess of magic, arcane mastery, and spellcasting proficiency, he could basically cast all spells below the third circle instantly. The casting time for intermediate spells had also been reduced to around 1 second. First, Soren buffed himself with a set of spells. Then, he tried to use an advanced dispel spell to dispel the other psionic spells on his enemy. However, it seemed like there was still a gap between their levels. Soren's dispel spell failed. The insect queen also had a layer of defensive spells on its body. Intimidating palm. Compared to the attacks of Soren and his demon incarnation, Master of Fist, Ti's attacks were unintentionally filled with more explosive power. Monks had always possessed techniques that were similar to hitting a bull through a mountain. Dee's concealing force specialty was definitely at the legendary level. Coupled with her special combat skills, she was able to penetrate the psionic defense force field and take effect on the Zerg Queen. A sharp and painful cry rang out. Dee's attack was blocked by the psionic shield, but the force penetrated the queen's body, and a series of electric sparks appeared on her palm. Expose weakness. Soren's figure suddenly disappeared, and the next moment, he appeared in the huge shadow of the Zerg Queen. With the emergence of a cold light that could not be seen by the naked eye, Soren waved his sword 18 times in an instant, all hitting the same point. Then there was a sound like an eggshell cracking in the air. Soren's curved sword directly hit the Zerg Queen's body, leaving a half-meter-long wound. Its body was very fragile. It could be inferred that the Zerg Queen's lifespan was very long, and her body's functions were very deteriorating. Bang! A strong psychic attack broke out. Dee jumped up and lashed out with a whip kick, but it hit the invisible air. Soren broke the psionic shield in an instant with the help of expose weakness, but this did not mean that the psionic shield had disappeared. It repaired itself at an amazing speed. This kind of energy shield was the most annoying. If it could not be broken, it would be difficult to attack the target. Sun Flame Form. Thunder Fire Palm. As an advanced pugilist in the Eastern Kingdom, Dee obviously mastered some combat skills that Soren did not know at all. The first move, Sun Flame Form, was very familiar, but the latter move, Thunder Fire Palm, was something he had never seen before. He could only see the crackling lightning suddenly burst out, accompanied by the explosion of flames directly covering a range of more than 10 meters. It seemed to be a combat skill that could only be displayed with the help of equipment. Blasphemy. Blasphemy. Soren and the demon incarnation, one cast Blasphemy, and the other cast Blasphemy. With the emergence of evil aura, the two spells acted on the Zerg Queen's body at the same time. Evil aura. This was the first time that Soren needed to use his aura ability in this kind of battle. With the spread of an evil and dark force, Dee's expression suddenly became uncomfortable. She could not help but frown and take a few steps back. On the contrary, at this moment, the ability of Soren and the demon incarnation was greatly improved. Relying on the increased immunity, Soren and the demon incarnation surrounded the Zerg Queen and attacked wildly. Although the artifact-level weapons had not been completed, the damage was still not something that ordinary things could resist. Crack. The sound of the crystal breaking came. Just when Soren used the effect of greater haste to break the Zerg Queen's psionic force field with a crazy attack, a piece of the strange lavender crystal broke. It's broken. Soren suddenly realized something at this time and said in a deep voice, "This Zerg Queen can use the power of these crystals. Hurry up and break them all." The crystals should be from the Arcane Empire. It could be arcane crystals or magic crystals. The specific name could not be recorded. After all, so much time had passed. Crystals had always had a good affinity with magic and were widely used in many fields during the Arcane Empire. Similar crystals could be seen at intervals in the ancient ruins. They were important nodes for the transmission of magic energy and were responsible for allocating the energy supply of the entire city. As a high-end magic civilization, the Arcane Empire naturally had a corresponding standard of living, such as constant spells to regulate the temperature, lighting systems throughout the city, and so on. These all required the supply of magic energy. These crystals should be connected to some energy device that was still operating in the ancient ruins. The Zerg Queen could support such a powerful psionic shield with its power. Piercing Shock Palm. Dee's reaction was also very fast. At the moment when Soren attacked the Zerg Queen, she pushed her palm to the lavender crystal next to her. Crack. 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 As the crystals broke, the Zerg Queen's psionic power immediately began to decline rapidly. At the same time, the amount of radiation in the hive was sharply reduced. At least, it had been reduced to the point where it would not directly cause physical damage. Now go get the alchemy stone. With the psionic shield completely broken, the Zerg Queen was basically no longer a threat. It was a pile of meat that was difficult to even move. As a true god, Soren would be a joke if he couldn't take it down. However, in order to prevent Dee from accidentally stealing the kill, Soren still let her take the alchemy stone first. This thing was not very useful for gods. Extending one's lifespan was very difficult for mortals, but for gods, it was quite simple. Whether it was Gloria or the Fallen Witch, they did not need this kind of thing. It was also good to take this opportunity to make friends with the Eastern Empress. The Eastern Empress' influence was all over the Eastern Kingdom, and many monasteries had more or less dealings with her. Hundreds of years of connections were not a joke. Okay. The alchemy stone was obviously very important to Dee. She rushed over in an instant and took the alchemy stone from a hexagonal crystal device on the ground. Something strange happened in an instant. The moment the Fist Master, Dee, took the alchemy stone, the Zerg Queen's body began to rapidly age. The aging speed was beyond imagination, and its skin and flesh were completely withered at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. It was like a tree that was rapidly dying. The alchemy stone supported the Zerg Queen's life. It was because of the alchemy stone that it was able to live from the arcane empire until now and give birth to so many offspring. The lifespan of the Zerg Queen was not very long, especially when it needed to give birth to a large number of larvae. The Zerg Queen was able to live until now because of the alchemy stone's life energy. It was also because of the alchemy stone that the Zerg Queen's nest remained nearby and did not move. Die. Soren naturally could not let the Zerg Queen die of old age. He rushed back and stabbed the Zerg Queen's head before its life energy was completely depleted. Poochie. A gush of nauseating blood spurted out, and then a divine light that was invisible to the naked eye appeared and began to merge into Soren's body little by little. A row of data appeared in front of him: killed Zerg Queen, mutant. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 725,000 slaughter EXP. Target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 5 divinity points. Target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 1 divinity point. There's still a divinity point? Soren was a little surprised because he actually extracted 1 divinity point from the Zerg Queen's corpse. Divinity could be inherited. However, it was almost impossible for a Zerg Queen of this level to inherit divinity points, so the only explanation was that the Zerg Queen's divinity points were accumulated bit by bit over a long period of time. The Arcane Empire had existed for thousands of years, and the Zerg Queen had accumulated 1 divinity point during this long period of time. The origin of these Zergs was probably not simple. Chapter 719. Mordor City, Laboratory. Did it work? Gloria slowly raised her head, and a wonderful light cluster was suspended in her palm. There were countless mysterious lines on it, which eventually formed a special energy core. This was about the core structure of Thaling, which was the part that represented intelligent life. The alchemy level of the Arcane Empire even far exceeded the interstellar era in some aspects. For example, in the research of artificial intelligence, golems could only be fighter armor at best, but Thaling and advanced alchemy life were real living intelligent life that could think. They had their own thoughts, their own rules of conduct, and more advanced Thaling could even be advanced to special professions. They belonged to artificial life, and quite a few advanced alchemy lives had their own souls. Gloria was carrying out a rather complicated research work. At this moment, she was wearing a loose robe and exquisite gold-rimmed glasses. If it weren't for the fact that her clothes were a little out of place, regardless of whether it was her serious expression or her serious attitude, she was no different from the beautiful female scientists of the interstellar era. She was intellectual and beautiful. The whole experiment process was quite complicated, and there was no way to count it in a few words. To put it simply, Gloria was extracting a sample of the advanced magic armor in the alchemy laboratory that Soren had cut off the energy supply. By analyzing its energy core, she was cracking an important alchemy technology during the Arcane Empire. How to give golems the ability to specialize. Yes. The golems during the Arcane Empire were more powerful than the current ones. This was like the difference between artificial intelligence LV1 and artificial intelligence LV5. The golems that were made now were all ordinary standard versions. However, the golems made during the Arcane Empire could be mastered by inputting more data into the core of the golems, so that these golems could master some simple combat abilities. For example, attack while defending. When Gloria was deciphering the trophies collected in the Wizard Tower recently, she found that a large proportion of these golems had 1 or 2 additional abilities. Even in one of the clay golems that was not very powerful, Gloria was surprised to find that it had the special ability of preparing magic. It was a clay golem with the ability, making magic equipment. It was supposed to be an assistant to the master of the Wizard Tower. This kind of technology was unimaginable in the current era, and Gloria was very likely to figure out how the Arcanists did it. Mother? Just as Gloria was looking at the energy core in her palm in a daze, Fallen Witch's figure appeared outside the door. She quickly regained her senses and turned around. How's your research going? This pair of mother and daughter were actually very similar. The only difference was that Gloria was more peaceful, while the Fallen Witch was like a mad scientist with a strong obsession. I made a slight breakthrough. Fallen Witch curiously looked at the thing in Gloria's palm, but she didn't ask too much. The direction of their research was different. Gloria was now focusing on the composition of Thaling, while Fallen Witch was more concerned about the powerful forces. She came here with a purpose. After a little glance, she whispered, "I've made some progress on the composition of that strange metal. I'm going to go to the astral plane in 2 days. I hope you can accompany me." The astral plane. Even for legendary witches, the astral plane was still a dangerous place. So Fallen Witch was going to invite her daughter to go with her. If the two legendary witches joined forces, even if they encountered some challenging astral plane creatures, they would be able to escape unscathed. Gloria's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and she said softly, "Yes, I can. But at least it will take 3 days. I still have some research to do here." Fallen Witch didn't have any objection. After confirming her daughter's agreement, she was ready to leave. However, at this moment, a magic light suddenly appeared, and a teleportation beacon was directly formed in the laboratory, and then Soren appeared in it. "Huh. You're here. Now come with me. There's no time to explain." Soren's figure appeared in the laboratory. He glanced at Gloria next to him, and without saying anything, he reached out and grabbed Fallen Witch's waist and said, "The situation is critical. Now come with me to teleport. That place is about to explode." Light appeared. Soren hugged the Fallen Witch and cast the teleportation spell again, leaving only Gloria, who was a little stunned, in the same place. She rarely saw Soren so nervous. Could it be that something happened over there? Time rewound to an hour ago. After Soren dealt with the queen worm, he began to collect other spoils of war, such as the special crystals in the nest. These things still had a strong residual radiation and magic energy, so it was definitely a good idea to bring them back to Gloria. The place with the strongest radiation was above the queen worm. After Soren made sure there was nothing else, he directly broke through the ground and rushed out. Here was the problem. As soon as Soren rushed out, he found himself in a huge laboratory. Or rather, it could not be called a laboratory, but a very large energy reaction device. There were many special crystal glass covers around it, and there was a huge crystal structure in the center. There were energy transmission pipes all around, and because of the rich energy radiation, he felt that it would not be easy to cast spells in this place. It was a large energy reactor. He could not understand the formula of energy generation, but he could feel that a large amount of magic energy was being transmitted to all parts of the underground ruins. It should have been running for a long time. What Soren needed to do now was to cut off the energy supply and stop all the golems from operating. He could not use violence to destroy it. There might be a big explosion, and Soren did not want to blow himself up. Fortunately, he could see some control devices here. After looking at it for a while, he finally determined that something like a lever seemed to be able to control the energy output here. But something unexpected happened. When Soren just touched the lever, it suddenly broke. What was even more disturbing was that the urgent alarms suddenly sounded, and then the energy reaction here began to change violently. Many crystals began to shatter, and the energy transmission pipes emitted electric sparks. Oh no. I don't understand this thing at all. Soren's knowledge was not enough, and his alchemy skills were not enough. If he had not studied the knowledge of the Arcana Empire in depth, it was impossible to understand the function of these things. He could only rely on his language proficiency to understand that the core device in the center was called elemental furnace. There was no other way. At this time, he could only call for help. There was no doubt that Fallen Witch knew far more about the energy of the Arcane Empire than anyone else. So Soren instantly connected to the teleportation beacon of the laboratory in Motor City, and then he hugged the Fallen Witch and teleported. With the emergence of a light screen, the two of them reappeared in the laboratory. Is this the elemental furnace? Fallen Witch was indeed a northern witch who had done in-depth research. She recognized the huge device in the center at a glance, and she looked a little excited. So big. So big. It's bigger than what the Witch Council provided me. We have to move it back. Move it back. No problem. But now, they should think about how to deal with the rampaging energy first, right? Soren had already felt that a lot of golems were rushing here frantically. It seemed that he had just triggered some defense mechanism. Shut this thing down first. Soren had no time to say anything at this time. He could only say anxiously, this thing looks like it's going to explode. A huge amount of energy. According to Soren's estimation, the explosion of this thing was similar to a small atomic bomb. It may not endanger his life, but this ancient ruin must be destroyed. He didn't do anything, he just slammed the lever to see if he could close it. He didn't expect it to become like this all of a sudden. Wait. I need to take a look first to determine how to close it. Fallen Witch also quickly calmed down. She glanced around and quickly said, this device has been running for a long time. Many of the control parts have been damaged. We have to cut off the energy core of the elemental furnace. At this time, there was a siren outside, followed by a huge force hitting the wall. They could vaguely hear the mechanical sound of the golems. Okay. Soren was a little nervous at this moment. He said in a deep voice, you try to shut it down here. I'll deal with those golems. If there's no other way, we'll teleport out of here first. We can always find useful things from other places in the future. At this time, looking at Fallen Witch's serious expression, Soren was really worried that she would be reluctant to leave and would be directly blown up by the explosion. No problem. This elemental furnace is very similar to the one I used before. I can shut it down. Fallen Witch raised her head with a strange look in her eyes and murmured, you can definitely do it. I knew you could surprise me. Hurry up and stop those golems. The creator of this place must have left a defense order. Don't let them come close, and don't let them destroy the pipes outside. Damn it. Why is this thing so unstable? At this time, Soren had no other choice but to rush out and stop the golems outside. He could only hope that Fallen Witch's knowledge was enough to shut down this damn elemental furnace. Chapter 720. Summon Shadow. A twisted shadow gradually formed beside Soren, and eventually turned into a dark humanoid figure. The creatures in the shadow plane were a bit special. As Soren summons, they would improve with his strength. At present, the summoned shadow had not reached the legendary level, but it was not a problem to interfere with some enemies. The battle in the hive was almost over. The limit on the number of golems had been reduced by quite a bit. The main reason was that the iron golems did not have much of an advantage against the death knell beetle, which had a challenge rating of level 7. But the problem was that the low-level golems were eliminated in the battle, and the golems that rushed over were more and more difficult to deal with. If there were not a few iron golems blocking the passage in front, the diamond golems behind would have rushed over. There was not much time left for Soren now, because the diamond golems had begun to smash the wall. They relied on brute force to push down the building in front of them. If the diamond golems also rushed over, Soren would have a hard time keeping them all outside. Now he only hoped that the Fallen Witch could quickly turn off the elemental furnace. Without the energy supply, these golems would stop operating. Sword form, spinning strike. With Soren's current strength, it was easy to deal with some iron golems. However, if possible, Soren really did not want to dismantle all of them, because the iron golems and above were relatively well preserved. If the energy supply could be turned off, they could all be transported back to Mordor. Dang! Dang! The diamond golems finally rushed over. But what Soren did not expect was that the diamond golem in front of him, which looked a little different, actually blocked Soren's attack, and it launched a counterattack while defending against Soren's attack. Attack while defending. At this moment, even Soren was very surprised, and he could not help but slightly retract his curved sword. Divine-level weapons were also very destructive to the diamond golems. The diamond golem in front of him was an extremely rare golem puppet with ability. Attack while defending. This was clearly a combat ability that only the higher-level arcane guards and magic-powered armors could master. During the Arcane Empire, in order to strengthen the combat skills of the golems, the Grand Arcanists began to analyze the skills of close combat professions, and then tried to implant these skills into the core of the golems through a method similar to data transmission. This led to the emergence of a batch of golem puppets that could obtain special abilities. There weren't many of them in the Arcane Empire, and Soren had only fought against a few of them. It's best to capture it alive. Golems with special abilities had amazing research value. Soren turned to attack the enemy's weak points instead of directly destroying them. It would be best if the diamond golem lost its ability to move. Sizzle. A series of electric sparks flashed, and a small-scale explosion occurred in the crystal tube outside. The laboratory behind also shook. About a minute later, Fallen Witch's voice was heard. She seemed to be a little excited as she said, "The elemental furnace is closed. However, it will take a while for these golems to stop operating." The energy transmission was cut off. Many of the low-level and mid-level golems on the periphery began to stop moving, and some of the clay golems and stone golems even shattered. Thousands of years of events had caused them to be severely depleted. After the energy of the last activation subsided, many of the golem puppets showed signs of cracking. However, the iron golems and above were not affected much. Most of the damaged golems were the clay golems and stone golems. The quality of these two golems was not good, and the diamond golems, as the main force, were not affected at all. Sizzle. The lavender crystals in the ancient ruins flickered like light bulbs that were about to go out. As the energy inside them disappeared, the movement of the nearby diamond golems also slowed down, and finally all stopped in place. Did it work? Soren slowly withdrew his curved sword, and then dispersed the summoned shadow. Fallen Witch's figure came out from inside. Her beautiful face was still filled with excitement. Perhaps because of her excitement, her face was slightly red. After coming out, she directly hugged Soren, and then said with a little embarrassment, "Great. The elemental furnace is very intact. We just need to go back and repair it. How did you find this place? With the things provided here, maybe I can duplicate an energy supply device of the same size." Soren's expression was also a little embarrassed, but soon returned to normal. It was just a coincidence. He did not intend to explain too much, and immediately said, "Let's transport the things here back first. This ruin is not stable, and there are a lot of insects. It may collapse at any time." After the Battle of the Golems, this ruin had completely collapsed. Although it did not collapse now, Soren did not know what would happen next after the elemental furnace was turned off. Fallen Witch also knew the importance of the matter, and immediately said, "I'll go set up the teleportation circle now. Later, let Gloria bring the golems here to transport these things back." Huh. There are so many golems here. They seem to be well preserved. Maybe we can bring them back and repair them. There were many golems in front of them. Not counting the damaged golems and the ones in the insect nest, there were dozens of iron golems in front of them, and 3 of them were diamond golems. The golems in the insect nest could not be preserved. Once they stopped operating, the insects would not let them go so easily. Soren was not sure how many of them could be preserved. Time was of the essence. Fallen Witch immediately began to set up the teleportation circle, and Soren began to collect the golems. The elemental furnace was too big, and Gloria and Fallen Witch had to work together to dismantle it and transport it back, and then reassemble it. Half an hour later, Gloria's figure appeared here, and behind her were the golems in charge of transportation. Opening a teleportation circle temporarily was not very tiring, and the resources used were definitely worth it. Gloria's expression was also very surprised, but she quickly got to work in high spirits. The first batch of items to be transported was the light purple crystals, which had a very strange energy storage and transmission effect. Then there were the many parts of the elemental furnace, and everything that could be dismantled and transported back was left behind. In the meantime, the insects attacked them several times, and there were many Nell beetles in the insect nest, but they were quickly dealt with by Soren. Clay golems were eliminated. Stone golems were eliminated. Flesh golems were eliminated. Iron golems were considered. Diamond golems were the highest priority. Soren did not care about the clay golems and stone golems at all, and began to look for traces of the diamond golems in the entire underground ruins, and then find a way to transport these big things to the teleportation circle. All the golems were not as valuable as the diamond golems, so Soren certainly had to choose the most valuable one. It was very unexpected. In a certain location in the insect nest, Soren also found a dragon bone golem, but unfortunately it had been dismantled by the insects. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. The group almost emptied out all the valuable things in the ancient ruins. During this period, they also found the bodies of the companions of the Oriental dancer, Butterfly. These people were not so lucky. Except for a few who managed to escape, the rest died in the nest. The golems did not leave the underground ruins. So according to the historical trend, the sword saint who ended the battle of the golems should not appear nearby, right? I don't know if it's good or bad. The battle of the golems was ended early by Soren, and the direction of this legendary event had begun to deviate. According to the original historical trend, although the battle of the golems caused a lot of losses, it also brought benefits to many forces, such as the Northern Witch Council and the Wizard City Alliance. They extracted a lot of alchemy technology from the golems left over from the Arcane Empire. It should also include things related to the elemental furnace. Because in the later stage of the Avatar crisis, the Wizard City opened an energy shield, directly covering the entire city. With the current level of alchemy, this was almost impossible. Note, the energy consumption is too great. The alchemy technology here had been monopolized by Soren. He had almost no reason to let the Wizard City study it. Maybe because of Gloria, he would cooperate with the Witch Council, but other forces should have no chance to get a piece of the pie. During this period of time, Gloria and Fallen Witch were responsible for unpacking things, and Soren was responsible for moving things back. In the end, the alchemy laboratory in the entire city of Moder could not fit them, and they could only be transported to the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane. Soren did not know much about the gains in alchemy. He only knew that the two witches transported a large number of crystals, devices, and lines back, and later spent more than a day drawing drawings of many broken places in the ancient ruins. It was the kind of drawings that looked like spell models with dense spell nodes. Ordinary people would feel dizzy at a glance. They drew hundreds of drawings before they finally came to an end. Soren was responsible for counting the number of golems. After finally sweeping the entire ancient ruins, Soren worked as a coolie and transported back a total of 9 diamond golems, 127 iron golems, 215 stone golems, and 72 clay golems. The flesh golems were completely damaged. Other special golems were basically only wreckage. The proportion of the clay golems was too high. Although the number was the largest, there were not many that could be transported back. These golems could not be activated for the time being. Gloria and Fallen Witch had to readjust the operation mode set when they were made before they could be activated. In the short term, these golems were just decorations. If the elemental furnace could not be successfully replicated, the city of Moder could not provide the energy to maintain their operation. Even if there was so much energy, only a part of it could be activated. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.